Hi, I would like to welcome everyone to our April webinar titled Let Your Content Drive the Tool. Next slide. So I wanted to tell you about how you can work your participant controls. So it is currently you're muted. We have hundreds of people that enroll for these every month, so we use the option of everyone is muted. You can send us questions during the webinar using your question feature that's shown here. It'll be on the right side of your screen, and it might be minimized. Dave Edelman, another relationship manager with TrainingPros, and I will be doing our best to keep up with your questions coming through the question or chat area. You could also raise your hand and answer to questions if asked by clicking on the small hand button. Okay, next slide.
We can come back to that one, Leanne.
Okay.
I'll let you do introduction.
Okay. So this webinar is sponsored by TrainingPros. My name is Leanne Langford. I'm an instructional designer and a relationship manager with TrainingPros. We're a learning and development staffing company. TrainingPros specializes in working closely with training and development departments of large organizations to identify, attract, and onboard contract professionals for very specific and specialized training and development needs. Next slide. So the TrainingPros difference, TrainingPros has 3 unique things that make us a little different than most staffing companies. Number 1 is our talent pool. Our consultants come to you with a balance of academic credentials and corporate or client experience that immediately add value to your team. Our pre-screened consultants bring valuable expertise to your project. In most cases, the consultant will have worked with prior TrainingPros clients. The second thing that makes us different is our relationship managers. Each relationship manager is an industry expert. Your relationship manager offers an end-to-end relationship, making us easy to work with and precise in our recommendations. And then the final thing that makes us a little bit different than other staffing agencies is our onboarding for success. We have a structured onboarding and debriefing process designed to get your consultant up and running quickly and ensure that the consultant can fit in with your team quickly. These 3 elements tie together to create simple and effective learning and development staffing experience for your company. Okay, next slide. If you're a learning consultant and you have at least 10 years of experience in the corporate world and would like to be considered for work with our clients, we would invite you to please go to training-pros.com and click Join Our Team, and there you'll have a nice long questionnaire to fill out, and then one of our relationship managers will contact you. Okay, next slide. Okay, so at this time, I'd like to introduce the designer and facilitator of this webinar, Dani Watkins, who is also one of our industry expert relationship managers at TrainingPros. Dani, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Dani Watkins. My background is as an instructional designer and trainer. Predominantly, probably 90% of my time is spent designing e-learning, design a lot of VILTs or virtual instructor-led training. I'm also doing some work in the 3D virtual world and doing some designing of content in that platform, and then also doing just LMS and Microsoft platform implementation. So my passion tends to be e-learning and technology. I really love tools, and so that's pretty applicable to today's presentation. I've worked in a variety of different industries, so I too am a consultant, an instructional designer, and also a relationship manager with TrainingPros, and it's been a really good partnership for me as a designer, both on the consultant side, but also on the relationship manager side. Great. So we can go ahead and get started, I think. Did you have anything else, Leanne?
No, it's all you now.
Okay. So we're going to try and play this video, and hopefully Most of you have seen Apollo 13. I'm not sure what the lag time is going to be, so we'll just give it a try. This kind of sets the tone for what most of us get ourselves into as we look at content. So I'm going to go ahead and play this.
We have a situation growing with the carbon dioxide. We have a CO2 filter problem on the limb module. 5 filters on the limb. We can live for 2 guys for a day and a half. So I told the guy, they're already up to date on the gauges. Anything. Judgment blackouts, beginnings of brain asphyxia. But the scrubbers on the command module, they take square cartridges, ones on the limb are round. Tell me this isn't a government operation. This just isn't a contingency we remotely looked at. The CO2 levels are going to be getting toxic. Well, I suggest you gentlemen have done a way to put a square peg in a round hole. Rapid. Okay, people, listen up. Come upstairs. Handed us this one. We got to come through. We got to find a way to make this fit into the hole for this, using nothing but that. Let's get it organized. Okay, let's go filter.
Okay, so I think the purpose of this is really because what we're talking about today is e-learning authoring tools, and how most of us as instructional designers and training professionals often get put into a position where we are forced to work with a tool that's already implemented and a tool that's already been purchased, and then we try and kind of retrofit the content into that tool, tend to get frustrated because the tool won't do the things that we need it to do. So in an ideal world, which we can't always do, but a lot of you might be in this position. So we want to look at comparing and contrasting different tools on the market. I've chosen tools that are kind of the bigger players in the market, tools that I have personally used that we can give you some insight on, and kind of compare and contrast the differences there. Define the uniqueness of your e-learning content, and then analyze which tool is going to be right for you with the content and your budget in mind. So if you're sitting at your desk and if you would go ahead and get out a piece of paper for me, or something at least to write on, a piece of scratch paper, I'm going to have you interact and do a little bit of reflection as we kind of go through this and talk through some of these points. If you need materials, all the materials are at this location right here, zenithperformancesolutions.com. They're under resources and then free tools, which is the link across the top of the page. So you can get the presentation for today. You can also get a couple of free tools. I have an Excel spreadsheet that I'm going to share with you that you can take and modify for your own purposes that hopefully you'll find useful as well. Okay, so here's our first poll. And Leanne, if you'll pop that poll up, what are you shopping for? And how many of you are here to make a purchasing decision, or you're in the market for new software? If this is true for you, you're going to reply with a yes. And if you, let's see here. If this is true for you, you're going to reply yes, and if not, then reply no. Okay, and I think I just gave the keyboard to you, Leanne. I think I needed to do that.
No, you didn't. The poll's going, and we have
about
70% have voted. When it gets to about 85, I will close the poll.
Great. Okay, do we have, how many people marked yes for that, Leanne?
So let's see. So I'll go ahead and close it and we can see it. But so far, 23% said yes.
Okay.
And 58% said no. And 19% said not sure.
Okay. So the majority of you have a tool in place, is my guess, and that you are having to work within that. If you are having to purchase a new tool, that's kind of our next poll question, and that is, how many of you are typically overwhelmed with finding the right tool and trying to narrow it down to find the right item? Go ahead and open that poll for us.
Okay, that is launched.
Great. So if you would reply to that poll, that would be great. Typically, when we go to a conference and we have to walk through that expo area, we typically are, at least I am, overwhelmed with all of the vendors that are there and all of the bright, shiny things that they have to offer. And I think what's hard is trying to figure out what tool is going to give you the most bang for your buck. And very often, we consider a whole bunch of different factors, but not necessarily the content itself. And not only the content that we're doing today, but what content we might be producing in the future. So how many people were overwhelmed with finding the right tool?
62% were overwhelmed, and 33% were not.
Great, thank you. So most of us, for the most part, are. And what we want to think about is, what is your content? Not only today, what kind of content are you producing? But what are you going to produce in the future? So on that sheet of piece of paper that you pulled out, I want you to write down, what are the types of content you're creating today? Are you creating leadership content? Are you creating business skill, soft skill content? Are you producing mostly ethics or HR type annual training content? Are you creating screen captures? Do you need to be creating more scenario-based content? If you're not creating that today, what would you like to be creating in the future? So let's say for now, right now, you're doing mostly page-turning annual training. That might fit your needs today, but what do you really hope that you can create in the future? And then what is unique about your content? So what is unique about your content, and what does that look like? And how is it different than maybe what others are doing? So these are some things that I want you to write down in your piece of paper, because I think what's important is typically we buy the tool for today and then we have new directives 6 months from now, and the tool that we purchase doesn't fit that need. We also want to take a look at the type of tool that's going to be released in the future. So let's take a look at some of our tools and what they have to offer. So take a minute, and I just want you to write down on your piece of paper, what are some of those tools? And you can even post a question to Leanne and to our organizers about what tools you're using. And so if you want to go to your participant chat and just type in some of the tools that you're currently using, that would be great. And I'm going to share with you some of the tools that we're going to talk about today and advantages and disadvantages of each. And we will repeat the link for the materials. I will put that up again so that everybody can get that, so that you can find the materials. What sort of tools, Leanne, are they sharing with you that they're currently using?
We get a lot of Lectora, Articulate,
Yes.
Captivate, Presenter, Snap,
Okay.
Storyline.
Hmm?
Oh, I got a Composica. Is that how you say that?
You
one?
got
Composica. And yeah, so a lot of repeats of the Storyline, the Captivate, the Lectoras. Oh, Authorware. Somebody's still using Authorware.
Okay, great. So thinking about those tools, here are some of them that I kind of pulled out and that I wanted to kind of highlight. And these are the big players on the market, but I'm going to add a couple more to the list. The first one is the Articulate products. So you have the Articulate Studio, which are the 3 top ones here, Engage, Presenter, and Quizmaker, and Video Encoder, that kind of come in this package. So that's Articulate Studio. 09 is currently the latest release, but I am waiting every day, any day now. Articulate Studio 13 will be released. Blogs aren't really showing a date. It was really targeted toward the end of 2012, and it didn't make it. So now they're looking at maybe first quarter 2013 is what some of the bloggers are saying out there. But that's the product that most of us have heard of as instructional designers and e-learning instructional designers. and a pretty popular tool out there. The latest tool that kind of came on the market in May is Articulate Storyline. And that takes a lot of the features, in my opinion, and a lot of this is my opinion, but it took a lot of the features of Articulate Presenter and Articulate Engage and Articulate Quizmaker. And it took those kind of features and pulled them into Articulate Storyline, but Articulate Storyline took it a big step forward in that it's HTML5 compatible, so the content that you're creating can be played on tablets. The other thing that it added is a whole bunch of different art people cutouts that you can purchase as well. And then in addition, it kind of took the concept of Adobe where you can do different layers of activities. So in my opinion, it took kind of the great features about Captivate and the great features about Adobe products and the great features about Articulate Studio, it kind of pulled them all together into a standalone platform that allows you to create e-learning pretty easily. It also allows you to do screen captures. So in another tool that we're going to talk about in Captivate, Adobe Captivate, you can create screen show me, try me's, and demo, or show me, try me's, and test me's. You can do something similar in Storyline. So, you know, you have to really, again, go back to what kind of content are you creating? Do you need to be able to do show me, try me's, and test me's, screen simulations, screen demos, and if you need to do that, Articulate Presenter, for example, would not be your product of choice. Storyline might be a product of choice because it has that type of functionality. Another tool that lots of people like to use, and I'm surprised nobody typed it in here, was Camtasia, Snagit, and Jing. These all come from the company TechSmith, so if you go to techsmith.com, you'll see those products. Camtasia is a great tool if you just need to do demos. So if you need to demo software or you need to demo how to access a website, any sort of screen capture, Camtasia Studio is fabulous for that. If you want participants to actually be able to enter data and pretend like they're doing it, so that would be what I would call a try me, then Camtasia is probably not your product of choice because you can't do that in there. You can only do screen demos. And Snagit is another tool that if you're doing a lot of screenshots and things like that, it's one of those tools. I use it at least probably a dozen times a day when I'm taking screenshots and doing things like that. So if you do documentation, that might be a good tool of choice. Okay? So going back to think about the content that you're doing and what's going to fit the needs. You really have to sit down and research these, and I would recommend trials of everything. Then you have your other three products out there. You've got Captivate. I know a lot of developers are still doing a lot in Flash. So Captivate's great if you're going to do screen captures, show me, try me's, and test me. If you have a bit of a larger learning curve, it's a great tool to use. If you are fairly new to that sort of technology, the learning curve is going to be a little bit steeper than it would, for example, in my opinion, again, with Storyline or Camtasia. Flash has a huge learning curve, so Flash is one of those programs that most people, if they have a kind of a programming type background, this is a great tool for them to use. The development time, when we talk about rapid development, Flash tends to be a less rapid development tool and takes a little bit longer, especially if you're not as familiar with it. Okay? Okay, so feel free, I'm just going to remind you too, if you have additional questions, feel free to fire those off in your chat window and Leanne will share those with me. Okay, some other ones that I'm going to share. Screener is another tool that you can use to do screen captures, and it's kind of part of the Articulate product line. You can use a free version of it. You can also use a paid version of it if you need more space and things like that. Lectora, sounded like we had a lot of Lectora developers. Lectora 11 just came out, and it's got some new features. It too is very much kind of soup to nuts sort of development. I use it occasionally, but I'll be honest, most of the customers that I'm working with and clients that I'm working with aren't using Lectora. I usually go in and use whatever tool they have on their systems. One that nobody mentioned, but I want to throw it out there because I've used it, is uPerform. uPerform is one of those tools that will allow you to create e-learning. It'll also enable you to create documentation from that e-learning. So for example, if you create some e-learning regarding, let's say, how to navigate Microsoft Word, and then you want to create a job aid directly from that, it'll allow you to create both at the same time without any too much additional effort. So uPerform is one that's out there that is probably less used, but pretty darn powerful if you have to do documentation. Okay. We had a great question on the difference between storyline and presenter, and I'm going to go ahead and answer that. I know that David responded to the person who asked that, but I want to make sure that you know the storyline is a standalone platform, a standalone application, if you will. Presenter and Engage and Quizmaker, those are little plugins that actually plug in right into PowerPoint. So when you go into when you install the Studio or just Presenter, you'll get an extra tab in your PowerPoint that says Articulate, and that will enable you to use that functionality. So you're actually working within PowerPoint and then using the publish capabilities of Articulate to turn it into some SCORM compliant content that can run on an LMS. So what's important to know is that when I've seen demos, I guess at ASTB ICE last spring in May, and then at Training 2013, they were doing some demos of Presenter 2013. And most of the functionality that they built in Storyline when it comes to being HTML5 compatible and some of the character artwork that you can get, a lot of that is being incorporated into the Studio package. So I highly recommend you do a little bit of research, especially if you're thinking, do I go Storyline or do I go Articulate Presenter? And see what those functionalities are, and again, what's going to meet your content the best. And I'm going to share a spreadsheet with you in just a moment that will enable you to see kind of my opinion of all of these different factors and how to make a choice. Okay, the last tool that I want to share with you is Raptivity. This is the one tool on here I have not used very much. And Raptivity is a great tool as well for building content. I have only seen demos. I have not used it personally, but I know a lot of people out there who are using it who really like it. So that one I can give you a little less information on. And the last one is Michael Allen's product, which is called Zebra's Apps. It is another interactive content platform that allows you to build e-learning. And he is usually at most of the conferences, so if you are attending ASTB ICE in Dallas in May, if you're attending online learning in September, usually he'll have a booth there and you can kind of check that out as well. And I think you can get a trial of that as well. That is another one that I personally have not played in, but looks fairly powerful. Okay? Okay, one question is that I just received was, I mentioned SCORM compliance. Is it also Tin Can compliant? Storyline is and has a lot of good support out there. I'd have to do a little research on Captivate. I'm not sure if Captivate 6 is, but we could definitely look into that. Presenter 09, as it stands right now, is not. Again, I would have to research 13 that's coming out and see if it's going to be. I have to say, if you were to pick a website with the most support and the most help and the strongest community when you can't figure something out, the prizes go to Articulate. They have a really strong online community so that if you don't know the answer to some of these things, go out to Articulate's site, join their e-learning community. It's called eLearning Heroes, and you can get any question answered that you could possibly think of from experts in that area. So, Okay, so what are those things that you think about when purchasing? You know, you're welcome to type a couple of these things into the chat window, and then Leanne can share them with me. But what are those things that you think about when you go to purchase? I mean, what's that number one item? And Leanne, did anybody share anything with you in the chat window?
We have features, 508 compliance, functionality, price.
Yeah, cost is usually first.
The learning curve.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Those are a lot of things that I listed as well. Usually what I hear people share is definitely cost, learning curve for sure. The author, so do you have subject matter experts creating this content, or are you as the instructional designer creating the content and pulling that content from the SMEs? You know, it really depends who has to have it open and who's actually developing. I work in one organization where SMEs create all of the content, and then they pass it off to the instructional designers, who then create some interactivity around it, and then ends up doing all of the publishing. So really, Presenter is a really good option for them, because all their SMEs need is PowerPoint and a template with which to work, and some guidelines. Their SMEs put all the content into the PowerPoint, send it to their instructional designers, who then instructionalize it, add some interactivity. Now in this case, it's probably level 2 interactivity, fairly, not terribly interactive, but the amount of annual training that this particular healthcare organization has to pump out, it's what makes sense for them. Is it perfect and ideal and highly interactive? No, but it meets the needs for what they have on an annual basis, and a lot of it is very technical healthcare type of content, so it makes sense for them. Another consideration, technology requirements. So do you have the infrastructure or even the laptop to support that content? For example, any of the Adobe products, if you install Adobe, the Adobe Suite, which includes Flash and Illustrator and Photoshop and Publisher, and Illustrator, Photoshop, Fireworks, the whole suite, it's a hog when it comes to your system and laptop requirements. So you really have to think about who's going to need this on their computers and on their laptops, and who can sustain that and who can handle it. And then marketing. I mean, I put up here the big guys when it comes to tools, but there are lots of other little tools out there. The little guy, the littler fish, and I would highly recommend, if you go to a conference, to really look at some of those other ones. The disadvantage is you may get less support, and it may have some idiosyncrasies that you may not realize until you get it installed. So things to think about. Other considerations is, how does it publish? If you need something to run on tablets and iPhones and iPads, then you definitely want to go with something that can publish to HTML5. And in order to do that, your choices are a little more limited. Your choices are Lectora, Articulate, Storyline right now, and Captivate 6. And anything beyond that, now I haven't looked at some of the others. There might be a couple others, but you're a little more limited. Okay, I'm going to come back to this question here in just a minute, so let me finish this topic and then I'll come back to that. Okay, ease of use is another one. So how easy is it to use? Again, in my opinion, Storyline was very easy to learn because there's so much support out there. Captivate is a little tougher to use. Camtasia is kind of right in the middle. So definitely a consideration. And then the interface. I mean, what's just comfortable for you when you look at the interface and how you're going to interact with it? And then your biases of IT and others. You know, are there other people making these decisions? And if so, that certainly comes into kind of a consideration, if you will. And then finally, time limitations. If you have a bunch of content you have to get out there and you got to get it out there fast, Captivate and Flash probably aren't going to be your tools of choice if you need a short learning curve. On the other hand, presenter is probably going to be, articulate presenter is probably going to be the easiest one to use and the quickest one to learn. So you really have to consider that. And then the skill sets of the people who are creating this. But typically what doesn't come up when we talk about this is what about the content? Very often we don't consider what content we need to put in there. For example, if we go out and we aren't doing any screen captures and we're not doing any demos and we're not doing any simulations, then the question I would ask, and you have to get it out quickly, the question I would ask is Captivate the right tool for you? Captivate tends to be a tool that you really need, is really useful if you're doing a lot of screen demos. And if you have folks who are fairly technical and can learn Captivate. So you really have to kind of weigh the options, but really think about what does your content look like today and what do you want your content to look like tomorrow. So right now, if you have page turning, low interactivity, the user doesn't have to think a whole lot, it's just they're clicking the next button, low interactivity, but you really wish it could have some scenario-based e-learning and it could have some branching, and you have the user making really complex decisions that takes them down a different path depending on what they choose, then definitely you want to be considering a tool for that. And maybe Storyline is that tool. Maybe Lectora is that tool. So some things to think about for sure. Now, one of the questions we had that I'll go ahead and talk about is who does level 4 interactivity for Bloom higher levels of learning? And so in my opinion, when we talk about level 4, a great example of level 4 that I have experienced is some work in the 3D world where the user is truly interacting with content and interacting with other learners in a 3D world like Second Life. I personally am using Avaya Live Engage to do that work and their platform, but it is a 3D world that enables learners to not only interact with content, but to interact with each other as avatars. So that is fairly high interactivity. Just because we say high interactivity doesn't always mean that we're talking about the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy. It really comes down to what the instructional designer has built in there and the value and the richness of that instructional design, in my opinion. Most of the time, yeah, I think that the higher level of interactivity potentially is the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy, but I don't know that we can say that 100% of the time, because if the instructional design really stinks and the content really stinks, then you're not, even though it's highly interactive, it may not have that piece in there. Okay, so let's take a look here. What tools do you use? So take a minute and write down kind of the tools that you use. And here are some other ones that we talked about earlier. And maybe there's one on this list that we've just talked about that you want to learn more about. So this is kind of like your let's implement or your action item when you leave the session. Write down one of them that we talked about that maybe you're going to go out and do a little bit of research on and learn more about it and see if it'll meet the needs of your learners and of your content. Okay, great. Okay. So here are some strategies to make better purchases, and I face this all the time because I walk into a client site and they'll say, we want you to build XYZ content, and I'll say, okay, what tool of choice? And they're like, well, we have Captivate, but we want you to turn this out, in a week or two, and all the content's in PowerPoint. So then you have to start getting into some conversations of, well, are they willing to try another tool? How quickly do they want it? And let's have some of those conversations because all of these tools are quite expensive. And I'll show you the spreadsheet here in a moment. And those are definitely some considerations we have to consider. So when you need to make a purchase, some considerations. Number one, content. If you take nothing else away from today, think about the content that you're creating. Are you creating business skill, leadership, demos, and what's the best tool to deliver that. Not only today, but in the future. 6 months from now, where do you think your content is headed? Where do you want it to be headed? Really thinking beyond what you're currently doing. Number 2, think outside the training department. So I work with a company who we developed a whole bunch of e-learning for them. And we did it using Articulate Presenter because Storyline was not released yet. And we now transitioned them over to Storyline. But think outside the training department because they had a whole group who was using Captivate and really wanted to stick with Captivate because that's what made sense. Now at the time, Captivate 5.5 did not play well with Articulate Presenter 09. Articulate Presenter 09 does not read ActionScript 3. So you run into a few issues when you're trying to actually embed those into Articulate Presenter. It's not very seamless. And our users, we were really concerned that if a new window opened up with this demo, like if they clicked on a link and it opened up a new window, we were really concerned our users wouldn't know where that window went because they are definitely new to e-learning and definitely not very tech savvy. So we had to look at what other departments were using and see if we could maximize what they were using and retool what they were using and what that looks like, and have some conversations outside of our silo. All too often I see organizations who get into the silo thought, and just because the training department's using one tool doesn't mean that they can't maximize and tap into other tools that are being used across the organization. And then again, think beyond your content today. Do you see a theme here? Really think about where your content is going. Think about your audience. What can your audience handle? At one of our client sites, their end users can handle a large amount of technology. At the other one, it's completely the opposite. We're lucky if they can figure out how to open their browser, quite honestly. And so we had to think about that as we transitioned their organization to e-learning. And it begs the question, is that the right move? It is. It was in this case. We did lots of kind of analysis to figure out if this was the right move for them, and it really was. But we really had to think about the audience when we looked at tools. And then the longevity of your product. So if you have a product that's constantly changing, if you're at a software shop where you're releasing software all the time, you need to think about what tool is going to allow you to create those screen demos and those screen simulations quick and fast and publish them and get them out the door so that they're not 3 months behind the software release. So definitely thinking about that. And then what will make you faster and cheaper? That's what our executives and our leaders want is faster, cheaper content to our end users. And how can we do that? And what tool is going to be right to do that? And then about who is using the content. So we mentioned this earlier, but who's creating the content? Are our SMEs creating the content, or are our instructional designers creating the content? And what are their skill sets? And then finally, what are your industry standards? Do you have industry standards when it comes to your LMS? If you have a learning management system, what does that look like? And in your industry, if you're in the oil and gas industry, what is kind of the tool of choice, if there is one? If you're in software, the company that I used UPerform in, that was their industry standard, and so that made sense for the type of content that they were producing. Okay, what would you recommend for software here's a question, what do you recommend for software that changes frequently? My recommendation would be something that has a very short learning curve and that also allows you to create it pretty rapidly, and you can have some pretty set templates. You have to look at the skill set of your users. So if you have instructional designers, if you have instructional designers who are fairly skilled, fairly technical, Captivate might be the way to go. If you create some templates that then you can just drop these screen captures into. If you have instructional designers who have less technical skills, then honestly, Storyline might be the way for you to go. Storyline, we just finished a project with someone where we did a bunch of screen captures, and we ended up using Storyline because they needed it quickly, and that made sense. So I think you really have to look at who's doing the work, what your budget is, and then for software, you have a couple of options. You've got your Captivate option if you want to get it out the door, and Storyline. And Storyline, in my opinion, is going to be a little bit faster. But again, you got to go back to those skill sets. So great question. Great question. Okay, and then finally, here's my biggest tip. Which products have trials? Get trials of all these products. So if you're trying to decide between, for example, Captivate and Storyline, get the 30-day trial. Give it a try and actually create some content in it. And really try and break it and see, how easy is it to put in audio? How easy is it to create the bubbles and move things around if somebody clicked in the wrong place on the screen and you need to modify the demo because you can't go back and re-record it? What's the smoothest recording? If you only need demonstrations, then Camtasia might be a great product for you to look at. But trials, I would highly recommend not buying any of these products until you give it a trial run and really not just play around in it, but actually do a project in it and see how it turns out. It takes time. I will admit it takes time, and none of us have time, but I'm going to say that you're going to be so much happier with your purchase if you've really trialed it and learned the ins and outs of it pretty well before you go and make a purchase. So that's my opinion. Okay, so here's what we've got. So this is a session that I presented at Training 2013. So we have this evaluation tool, this spreadsheet. And again, this is totally, it says in here, the ratings in this document are the opinion of us or of me and my team and are valid as of February 2013. So when we presented this at training, what we did is we looked at Captivate, Flash, Presenter, Camtasia, Studio 09, Storyline, Lectora 11, PowerPoint, Snagit, UPerform, and Zebra's app. And what we did is we looked at the total cost, we looked at ease of use, and we looked at author. And I'm going to go ahead and open one of these samples here, and I apologize, I should have had it open already, and I didn't. So let me pop this open for you. You should see Excel opening here in just a minute. And I'll give you the address again of where you can see this. Let me make it a little bit bigger for you. Okay, so we looked at total cost, we looked at ease of use, we looked at the author and who's authoring content, we looked at technology specs, and we looked at functionality. If you want this, we can get this to you. Well, I apologize, my Outlook is closed and yet it still is bringing up like crazy. We can get this to you in an Excel format so that you can, for example, if you want to evaluate 4 of these, not all of them, these tools, you could do that, and then as you use the trials, you can kind of create a nice spreadsheet for yourself and really modify this. I feel like as instructional designers, the more we can share with each other, the stronger we're going to be as an industry and as a profession. And so I think that this is, again, our opinion of what we've experienced in some of these products and what might be helpful. And we've kind of ranked them. So you go back to Captivate and your question about ease of use. In my opinion, PowerPoint's the easiest to use. Then you have Snagit, you have Presenter, you have Studio, and we've ranked these. Now, this doesn't look at the type of content. Let me just close this guy so it goes away. We haven't looked at, I lost my train of thought. We haven't looked at all of these with the content that you're developing, but this will give you a nice start to what's going to make the most sense. Good grief. Okay. And it looks like we've got a quick question here. Yeah, great point. Carolyn wants to point out that Adobe does a subscription, And not only does Adobe do a subscription, but Zebra's Apps does a subscription as well. And actually Articulate has that option too. So all of those kind of options may make it easier for you to afford it as well, because all these guys are fairly expensive for the most part. When you look at Captivate, Articulate products, Lectora, and so you really want to make the right. Okay, and then we have another question here: who is for 508 compliant? So we've gone down here and done some research, and we've got the ADA 508 compliance, and pretty much all of them do, with the exception of obviously, you know, some of your tools like Snagit and things like that. But for the most part, most of these are 508 compliant. Most of them are SCORM compliant, depending on where you need to host and put these tools. So great questions. Great questions. Let's make sure I haven't missed any other ones here. Yep, another consideration is huge is LMS compatibility, if that's important to you. And I agree, being SCORM compliant does not mean it will work with your LMS. I'm going to go back to my trial. Get some trials of these guys and really, let me go back to my PowerPoint, get some trials of these guys and really try and break them. Build something in them, publish them in AICC, publish them in SCORM 2004, publish them in SCORM 2.1, and then implement them into your LMS and see if they work before you go out and purchase the content. I think that's a great point that Sherry points out. Great point. Okay, great. Okay, so here are some resources. Again, I found some great resources. Materials are at zenithperformancesolutions.com. If you click on resources, it'll be under that link. So you'll go to zenithperformancesolutions.com, resources, and then free tools. And you'll see some other tools there too. If you need the Excel spreadsheet, you are welcome to email me. I'll show you my email address here in a minute. The top 100 tools for learning, I really liked this article, and it gives you a whole bunch more than I can cover in an hour. And then the 7 top authoring tools that Learning Solutions Mag reviewed. How do you, and we have another question, how do you choose your tool for a project? You work first on outlining what you're going to do with the content and then determine the tool. So it's like that square peg in a round hole. I think 50 some of you % already had a tool in place. So you have to think about, okay, if I already have a tool in place, I'm going to design the content and then I'm going to try and retrofit this tool to make it work. If you haven't bought a tool yet, then I would say, gosh, outline your content and figure out what does your content look like today, storyboard it out, what do you want it to look like tomorrow, and then absolutely then pick your tool accordingly. Most of us don't have that advantage, so I would go with, always, gosh, the guts of what we do is storyboarding our content, right, and laying it out so that it's instructional, it's interactive, people love it, and they learn something. Those are our goals, right? So write the content first, storyboard the content first, and then if you already have a tool in place, figure out how to make that tool work faster for you and cheaper for you. So for example, I already have Captivate implemented. I've already purchased it. So how can you build some templates that every time you create a class, you can do it at a much faster speed? If you're going to use a Storyline or a product like that, go out to the eLearning, go out to articulate.com and click on, I think, Communities, and then go to eLearning Heroes. And eLearning Heroes, if there's something that Articulate Storyline can't do, there are hundreds of people out there who will tell you how to get around it. And for example, we have a project we're working on where we have an audio track, and we needed to play background music and background for the client. And it currently, Storyline does not allow you to do 2 audio tracks. So I went out to eLearning communities and did a little research, and I was able to figure out how to go into the XML file that it produces and put in some JavaScript so that it'll play that background music throughout the entire piece to meet our clients' needs and what they wanted. So, you know, there's certainly great resources out there, and it's just us networking with each other so that we can build bigger and better courses as we go ahead. So great question. I would definitely think about your content first and then figure out what tool is going to fit that the best. And if you already have a tool in place, figure out how to make that tool work for you. There's lots out there. Great question. Okay, so here are some resources. Again, this PowerPoint is posted on the website. It's actually the one that I think is out there is the one we did at Training 2013. I'll get this one uploaded here in a little bit so that you can download this exact one as well. They're pretty similar. And then check out those articles. And again, if you want some real interaction with us, we will be at ASGD. We're delivering this same presentation. It's very interactive, so bring some pencil and paper at ASGD ICE in Dallas. And then we're also doing this again in Chicago. We were invited to come do it at Online Learning in Chicago in September. Connect with me at TrainingPros.com, training-pros.com, and also on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me, and hopefully you can at least take some good little tidbits away and think about your content in a new way. And I have some time if there are any other questions. I don't know, Leanne, if there's any more questions. I kind of saved about 5 or 10 minutes for questions if there's any more.
None coming through yet.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dani. We appreciate your time, and I appreciate everyone in the audience, your time for having a lunch and learn with us if you're on the East Coast. So, oh, got it. Now the questions are coming in. Okay. Photoshop and Fireworks weren't mentioned. Any thoughts on those? Yeah, so in my personal preference, I like Fireworks better, but I have a teammate who's a graphic designer, and she loves Photoshop. So she actually loves Illustrator. So, you know, Photoshop is really, again, the learning curve with those Adobe products is a little bit steeper. I find that Fireworks, I could learn faster than I could learn Photoshop. So personally, that's my preference. I think if you ask Megan, who's on my team, she would say her preference is Illustrator, and that's the one that she uses. The Adobe Suite's kind of funny because they acquired, you know, several different tools in some of their acquisitions, and so they've kind of bundled them up, and they all, you know, you can pretty much do the same thing with Photoshop that you could do with Fireworks. It's just a matter of preference and which one you think you can learn the fastest is my kind of personal preference. And then it looks like somebody asked about PowerPoint. PowerPoint is one of those tools that if you needed to, you know, get content out to people but not necessarily learning, you know, you could probably push content out to people. We have a client that we worked with a while ago who just needed to get content out to their engineers, and they really didn't want it to be interactive because they needed to just get it out there. You could do two things. You could publish it using Articulate so that it was had a little bit more of a navigation, or you could probably build it in PowerPoint and post it on an intranet somewhere. Or on SharePoint or somewhere like that. So is it ideal? Would I call it learning? Probably not. But again, we're all instructional designers. We all are working under really strict time expectations, and so you work with what you have and you get the best content out there that you can within those constraints. So, okay. Any other questions? I think that might be it. Yep, we seem to be out of questions, and people are starting to leave to get back to work. Thank you so much, Dani.
Sure. Great. Okay. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.